experiences that seem to suggest it's not like that. So I would rather leave it as an open question myself.
So on the second question, I'm not exactly sure why you're implying that the subcortical structures would, if I heard you correctly, you said they would be the repository of the self, or
no.
Okay.
Just some old way of relating to self. It's very, reactive and fight or flight.
So I think that, first of all, just in terms of development, human development, subcortical structures actually develop quite late as well. There's new evidence to suggest, for example, that there are maturational changes going on in the amygdala until at least age 20. Wow. And so it's clear that the sort of dogma that the subcortical architecture is in place early in life, and then there's this other evolutionary newer real estate which is developing is just too simplistic. But it's also the case that I think a lot of the action is going to be in the connectivity and relationship between these subcortical structures, which I think provide a lot of the affective stickiness and the stickiness of identification, and the extent to which those are connected to and influence and constrain the activity of other areas, which are the more that you refer to, the more evolutionary new regions of the brain. And so I think that there is going to be a lot of important information that we can glean from those patterns of connectivity and how they change over development and how they change with practice. So this is a lot of actually what I'm going to be talking about tomorrow.
And I think for Evan, if I could ask Evan, doesn't this in some way also, this question connects a little bit also to your notion of the formation of self as object? I mean, the implication of the statement was it has to do with empathy.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah.
So is it, is the dysfunctionality here comes in when the empathy doesn't become compassion? I mean, how would you put compassion into that picture, or is it just not relevant at this point?
Well, that's a complicated question. I mean, I think of, in one sense of empathy, so empathy can mean different things. It can mean a kind of, basic affective resonance that happens at a kind of sensory affective level. It can mean a kind of cognitive perspective taking that reiterates back onto self, which is sort of the level I was talking about it. And then empathy in the sense of a development into compassion, I think of as where there's the intention or the action to relieve the suffering of the other. And that seems to me, empathy is a foundation for that, but that seems to me to be a further step. And I guess, developmentally, that would, I would think that would presuppose the kind of empathy that I was talking about.
Yeah, it might be a condition of the environment.
Yeah.
Alan, what if you want to say something about?
Sure. So there is some evidence that, of course, as Evan was saying, there's a kind of basic aspect of empathy that is resonance with another individual that may well have to do with mirror neurons in the brain, and particularly with activity that occurs in certain areas deep within the brain, in the cortex, but deep within the cortex, that activate not only when an individual, him or herself, is experiencing pain or distress, suffering, but when that person sees someone else experiencing pain or distress. But I agree entirely there's another step to compassion, or certainly to what we might call mature compassion, because there's also evidence that that sort of resonance alone can lead to empathic distress or empathic over-arousal. And I may have mentioned this yesterday, but the evidence that individuals who actually get the most physiologically aroused in observing someone else's distress may end up being the least pro-social or compassionate or altruistic in their behavior, perhaps because they're turning away to modulate or reduce that arousal. And that emotion regulation may actually depend in an interesting way on our cognitive abilities to differentiate self and other. So, very curious kind of phenomenon here. Part of compassion dependent on this immediacy of interbeing, part of it dependent on our ability to actually differentiate, not one, not both.